Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Digging Deep and Oki 811 podcast. I'm your host, Luis, and today we have a great episode. Today we have Scott Landis and Benjamin Dierker, authors of the new book, Holding Back Disaster. Scott has spent more than 4 decades working in damage prevention and underground infrastructure safety. And Benjamin works on the policy and research side of infrastructure as executive director of the Alliance for Innovation and Infrastructure. They have brought those perspectives together to tell the story of damage prevention and where the industry is going from here. Hi, guys. Thank you for being here with me today.
You bet. Thanks for having us.
So let's start right off the bat. I want to talk about the book. I know it was just released, right? The day 8/11, 2 days ago. So how was that? How was the excitement? Just, it's such a big day, especially for the 811 centers.
Yeah, it was exciting, and Benjamin's been the marketing machine, getting the word out there. But yeah, it was fun that it worked out to kind of be launched then on 811 day or right around there. So that's been great and perfect timing.
So I'm gonna start with the first question, real quick. What inspired you both to write this book, Holding Back Disaster? And why do you feel this book was needed now? So let's start with Scott. Tell me what inspired you to write the book with Benjamin, and then Benjamin, what inspired you?
Mine's fairly easy. It's actually Benjamin, because I was actually in the process of writing an unrelated book when we met up in Calgary at the Underground Safety Partners 40th, I think, annual meeting. And he asked me if I thought about writing a book about the industry. And at that point in time, I was in the middle of the other book, and I think my answer was no way. I don't have the time. It's too much work. And I think he said, well, what if you had a co-author? And I said, well, okay, keep talking. And so from my perspective, that's kind of how it got started. And then I think it was the kind of the perfect blend, as you said, Luis, the having Benjamin coming from I know it may not look like it, but the younger perspective versus me, and also just coming out from that, again, the policy kind of think tank thing versus me just kind of being more immersed in it and not having that perspective of stepping back as much like he has. So that's kind of my version. And
so yeah. What about you, Ben?
Yeah, I think that's a faithful retelling, Scott. My perspective is when we started thinking about this, so Scott's been in this industry 40 years. He's seen everything. He knows everyone. Yeah. I'm newer, so I have a different perspective. One thing that I've come across a lot is, because I'm not in the industry, the phrase damage prevention is not used in my everyday life often. Obviously, when I study this issue, it is. But it's something people in the policy world, people in think tank world, academia, really don't think about or focus on. So part of my motivation, and the reason we picked the title Holding Back Disaster, was to give a new language into the industry, something that people can claim and take ownership of. You might just be a locator, but nobody's just a locator. You are holding back disaster. You might just be a contractor, but you are actually, when you're safely digging, holding back disaster and building the economy, the infrastructure we all rely on. And so for me, part of it was to explain this industry that I've studied now for a decade, not nearly scratching the surface of Scott's experience, but the more and more I learn, the more complicated it is, the more interconnections there are between all these stakeholder groups, the more responsibility you learn that every stakeholder has. And so just what we wanted to do is unwind that web and just demonstrate what the ecosystem is, who is in it, how they work together. At the end of the day, how you might just be an average homeowner or renter, but you're just an average citizen, but you need your lights to turn on and your toilet to flush, and you need gas and electric and telecom. And this is the industry that is holding back disaster. It just lets you live your life. And we obviously want to reinforce, resonate, echo the 811 messaging, and that's all throughout the book. Because we want somebody to walk away with this book knowing about 811 intimately, how it affects their life, what the stakes are, and an appreciation for the people in the industry, a resource for them to use, that kind of thing. So we were trying to do a lot all at once, but the real motivation was to explain what is this industry, what does it do, and why does it matter?
Yeah.
One of our themes now here at Oki is we like to say we're all connected, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the impact of what people do when it comes to excavating and or locating, it has an impact on the person that is in their house.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, you think about if people don't realize what those interconnections are, it's so easy to be siloed. So
yeah,
the contractor who says, "Well, I have to submit a ticket. I'm going to submit a ticket, and then for me, I've done my part." But that ticket gets sent to the call center. A bunch of utilities get notified. A bunch of locators get notified. You have just created work for someone else. You've put a burden, an appropriate burden in some sense. It's their job, but an inappropriate burden if it's too large of a ticket, or if you really weren't planning, or if it's an emergency ticket when it's not an emergency.
yeah.
And helping people see like your the things you do impact others positively or negatively, I think does help. And that's something
And
we
it-
try to again map out and demonstrate.
yeah,
You want to add
I
something,
think,
Scott? Yeah.
that's a really good point that Benjamin made about the getting everybody to see the big picture. Because too often, you see, like we're all guilty of that, right? We know our silo really well, and it's not that you don't care about the other parts. You just might not think about it. I mean, we had a great example here. I had a tree root go through a sewer line, right? So we had to have it fixed. And so the guy had to dig up our front yard and go down 6 feet and do all this stuff. And I went out there and, there's no paint. And he said, oh, it was like a 2-day project. He said, oh, no, that's all right. I call him tomorrow. And they said, well, no, it doesn't work that way. And he said, oh, yeah, no, I do it all the time because it's a sewer. So it's an emergency and they just come right out. And so I explained the whole process to him and he was like, wow, I mean, it wasn't like he was intentionally abusing the system. To him, that's just the way it worked.
It works.
And so part of the reason for the book, and of course, then we have to get everybody to read it to get the big picture, but it's to help create that big picture. And I also want to add, because this part was all Benjamin's brainchild, is each chapter has kind of this fictional introduction that is a story that gets the reader. Let's say it's just Joe college student who's getting this as a part of a class,
Mm-hmm.
and you read it, and like the intro to the whole book is all this stuff happens and the house blows up, but it actually doesn't, because the locator did his job, everybody did their job, and it didn't happen. And so to me that was a really big thing. Plus he wrote all those, but just the concept of it makes a subject that might not be super compelling to the average reader a lot more interesting.
Wow. And for you guys, for someone who's outside of the industry, right? Like you said, not everybody. It feels like people know what they're doing day to day, but they really don't know much of how things work. But for someone who's outside of the industry, what is the biggest misconception when it comes to excavation and damage prevention?
There's so many. Which to choose? I think obviously, like thinking about this week being 811 day,
Yeah.
who's responsible for calling? Is it necessary? A lot of people, like homeowners, might think, well, I'm just, the classic examples, putting a mailbox in, planting a tree, building a deck, but they might not think they need to do it. And even people who do disturb the ground a lot, like landscapers, might think, well, I'm going to be 2 inches in the soil.
That's nothing.
But like, who knows what, one, you might go deeper than 2 inches on any given day or any project. And two, stuff moves around. You don't know how deep it was laid in the first place, So a first misconception, I guess I would just say everyone, every time is responsible and should be notifying 811. I would say another misconception is that there's probably not something under me here. You might be out in a field or under a street or something, and you might think, well, I can see street lamps and they're 20 yards away, so there's nothing here. And we did a study at AII that found essentially there's 50 million miles of buried infrastructure. The United States is very big, but 50
Oh,
million
yeah.
miles is also very big. And pretty much if you're digging, there's something near you, under you, around you. There's just nowhere that's safe. And obviously there's places there's nothing, but it's not ever safe not to contact 811. That's the misconception. So there might not be something necessarily directly under you, but it is still important to call.
I
Yeah.
think a lot of people make assumptions, right? When it comes
Yeah.
to digging.
Yeah, I would echo again what Benjamin said, and then I want to add one other thing. But another good example is kind of the misconception that when you call 811 or request a locate online, click before you dig, um, that everything gets located just because you did that. And, we all know that's not true, but I still think it's a misconception that people forget about the private lines and all that type of thing. And I had a personal example of, we were putting on a trade show conference in Los Angeles at the Los Angeles County Fairgrounds, which is a massive, massive complex. And out in the infield of the horse racing track, we were going to do digging demos. They said, great, you just have to put everything back. And so we obviously called 811. I don't think it was 811 then. So we called USA South
Okay.
to get the locates done. But again, that didn't identify the things that were owned by the fairground. So went to the fairground general manager and said, hey, we need to find out where all the utilities are in the infield. And he said, well, there's nothing out there. And I said, well, are you sure it does? There's lights going all day around now. There's nothing out there. And fortunately, in this particular case, my uncle used to be the operations manager at the LA County Fair, which is how I found out about the fairground. So I called my uncle and said, hey, Uncle Doug, they said there's nothing out here. And he goes, oh my God. He says, there's high voltage cables, there's fiber for the. So I went back in and to the office, and I had written up just a non-attorney's thing that said, you're taking on all liability for financial, for people getting hurt, knowing full well that he's not gonna sign that. And I said, because we're not doing anything unless you sign this. And then mysteriously, he found a map, and we got some locates done. But I mean, that's a common misconception. And I would say the other one that I think is, personally, I think it's a really big one, is like, well, this is free. Well, yes, it is free to that person who's calling in the ticket, except in Pennsylvania where they have to be a member. I can't remember the details, but it's not that it doesn't cost anything. It costs a lot of people money, to go out, to do the locate, all those things. And so, the problem with any perception that something doesn't cost anything because it's not costing you money, it gets abused, not intentionally. It just gets abused because it's easy to abuse. And I do think that's a big problem. If people were actually writing a check every time they had to dig, this would be a different thing. And I'm not suggesting we do that, but people would look at it differently.
If the ticket would cost, I don't know, 25 cents for locate, then things might change. Who knows, right? Another interesting question I have for you guys is, the book looks at the history of damage prevention. What is one of the lessons from that history that the industry still needs to remember today? So who wants to start with that? Going back to the history.
Yeah.
Scott, you were there at the beginning 100 years ago, right?
No, not the beginning, but yes. That's Bill Kiger. Yeah, I mean, I would say there's not that much that, or I should say, what's not changed a lot is the passion of the people in the industry. Technology has changed, that now we have 811, we didn't before. Canada has click before you dig. Some of those notification mechanisms have changed. And I will say probably the biggest change that I've seen as a result of that is pre 811. Every state had to do their own thing, and in some cases, several things within a state, right? And so the problem with that was while the process was still taking place, people were requesting locates and all that, is that it was really hard to market that message, which is a big deal because we all know that just getting a locate request doesn't solve everything, but it's a pretty big first step, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you
it is.
know, when every state and every call center had to kind of come up with their own way to do it, and even though they talked to each other, there wasn't uniform messaging because you know they couldn't put a uniform message out there. You'd have to have 60 phone numbers on the sign, and we ran into that with signs and decals. Think of a pipeline company or AT&T or whoever. What did their warning signs used to have to say, right? I mean, depending on where it went. Well, is that efficient? I have to know if the sign's going to go to Oklahoma or Texas or what part of Texas back in the day when there was more than one. I mean, so anyway, that was a radical change from my perspective. It really allowed the industry to kind of gel together and start pushing out a common message. Like through the CGA, it was a good spot for everybody to get together and share those ideas and come up with messaging. Pre-811, that wasn't really very effective.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I think
Wanna add something?
one thing when I look at the history, people might be shocked to see how similar the very first call center is to today. The function of it is the same. You call one number,
Yeah.
they coordinate from there, and then obviously earlier it took more time. The coordinating was not as efficient. It was not web-based at all.
We also have technology now that kind of helps that flow.
Well, and exactly. So think about every new technology that's come on, it's gone into that same process, but made the process more efficient, more accurate. But the overarching process is pretty much the same. You're going to dig, so you notify, they coordinate with the utilities, locators are sent, your site gets marked. The overarching process is the same. I think the lesson that's still important and that you can draw from that history is as new technology gets added in, you don't necessarily have to break the mold, although you can. You can try something totally different, and that's happening. We can get into technological examples too. It's leveraging that technology to the best ability. So when this was all starting out, sure, they were calling a number on landline phones. Now we can use a cell phone, or now we have web-based entry.
Yeah.
Forgetting all that, we now have drones and things that can do mapping and AI and web-based platforms that can put digital maps together, hold digital maps in encrypted platforms and things like that for security that simply didn't exist. There was paper maps back then. If you were coordinating, if the maps were accurate at all, you were consulting a paper map or relying on someone's knowledge of their own facilities. I would say as we shift to having all this technology, we have to take advantage of it. You just can't anymore put something in the ground and not record a high fidelity digital version of that too. And if you've gone and exposed the facility, you need to use what you've just seen in real time and validate, update, or improve the maps that you do have. And so just seeing as technology is added in, the lesson is don't just have new technology for its own sake, or don't rely on the fact that somebody can locate better today than they could 20 years ago. Use that better locating to create or update or resolve a digital map so that that can then be a resource going into the future. I think that's not being done enough yet. It obviously is being done, but the more and the more we can use technology as efficiently as possible to augment the process that we know works, the better.
And just like you were saying, Scott, like, all the evolution of the A11s, but still each state operates kind of different, and some of the policies and laws are slightly different. And that's kind of like a big challenge, right? Still to keep it, that consistent, I guess, process when you contact A11 or an A11 center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think part of the mindset that really we have to overcome, everybody does, is, and again, it's just human nature, is that it's not just about me, right? Like we have to get people to think more globally. And it's, again, not a malicious kind of thought process. It's just that, like Benjamin said, somebody take a vacuum excavation and they go down and they locate a pipeline because they're crossing it, doing directional drilling. It's like, Well, immediately it should come to their mind, or in a perfect world, that, well, I need to make sure and pass this information along so the maps can be improved, so everybody's safer. And so I think that's a message that I'm not really sure how you get it out there, but as an industry, we really need to find a way to get everybody thinking together as a team. And how does everything I do impact safety? It's a culture thing, and that's really what has to change, is the culture within every stakeholder group. I think to think it's not just about our pipeline; it's about the keeping excavation safe.
Yeah,
And
and
got, yeah, go
I
ahead.
would add just quickly, Scott, it's not just culture, because I definitely think that is
Mhm.
enormously part of it. But
Yeah.
one thing is the like ability. The person who's excavating, they don't own the facility. It's not theirs. They don't own the
No,
maps.
yeah.
There's no mechanism for them to update or improve the mapping.
Sure.
Currently, there's literally no way. If you're just a contractor on a job, your job is to dig, move the earth, and either put something in place or allow somebody else to come in and put something in place. But if you're exposing a facility and maybe it's 3 feet to the left of where the spray paint said it was going to be, what's the current mechanism for you to go tell the gas company and then for that map to get updated? Like,
Mhm.
if in the best case scenario, you tell the gas company, hey, this was in the wrong spot, there's no requirement that they update it, or at least your job is completed as the excavator. So giving some ability for these people to actually work together and to collaborate is a missing component that we cover this some in the book. There are companies and processes that are allowing for that.
Mhm.
Certainly, they're not at scale and they're not systemic here in the U.S. But culture is the essential glue that makes that possible. But the
Mhm.
actual logistics and mechanism also doesn't exist. So
I mean, you have to be way too proactive to go ahead and
yeah, and
and do that. Yeah.
there's not a real benefit to being proactive, or there's not a direct benefit. As an excavator, you're spending more of your time if you're being that proactive, contacting them, working with them, helping them update their map. What are you seeing as a benefit from that?
Right.
Maybe a
Yeah.
little bit of goodwill. Maybe they pick you as the excavator on the next job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and
Right.
that's something we do cover in the book too. Like, there are people who are hacking the incentive of that. If you can give an incentive to the excavator to
Oh, that's a different story.
not
Yeah.
just do their job safely, but report information back, then you're creating a feedback loop where they have incentive, there's a cultural component, and a mechanism is there. Without one of those or all three at the same time, it's difficult to see that progress.
Agreed. And I'm sure it doesn't exist now, or it may, but it will very soon if it doesn't. And that, someone does that pothole and sees the pipeline down there. I guarantee you that very soon, if not already, you could take a picture of that with your phone, and that's going to be all that has to happen. You should be able to text that picture to somebody, and all the information on that phone and AI is eventually, not now, but I think going to be able to be used to improve maps everywhere. And if it becomes that easy, then all of a sudden, like Benjamin said, then it might actually start happening.
And a follow-up question to that: where do you guys see the biggest gaps today? Is it education, communication, technology, regulation, or somewhere else? I think you guys been saying culture a lot.
I was just going to say that the quickest answer, not the most simple, but the quickest answer is culture. Um, we know the process works. We know, there's CGA research.
Yeah.
If you make the call, it's like 99% chance you'll avoid damage. Even though there's miscommunication, there's issues that happen. Obviously, any given job might look different, but the cultural component, I mean, it pervades the whole issue. It's at every step. It's at every state. If you're just a crew or a company and you don't have the right culture, there's going to be more opportunity for miscommunication, missteps, not kind of thinking a step down. How does my action impact the next person? You might call that like safe handoffs of information. The less good the baton pass, the more opportunity to drop it. I would say that all revolves around culture.
Agreed. And the culture, I think it goes even past that. With the right culture, you have fewer excavators calling in, 2 miles of locates, that they're not going to get to for 3 weeks, and they do it because they can, not because they're being malicious. But again, if that culture within each stakeholder was one that it's everybody, we're all in this together, like the CGA's motto. I didn't say it right, but yeah, it's we have to have that mindset and that culture to fix everything. Shared responsibility. There we go.
Yeah, I know. I have the chance to interview the equivalent to A11s in United Kingdom, and it's Ellis Butt, and
Line search
the
before you
one
dig.
in Australia. I'm trying to remember the name in Australia.
Before you dig Australia.
Before you dig Australia, yeah, yeah. And I talked
cover
to the
them in the
security
book.
director. Was that?
We cover them both in the book.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice, awesome. Yeah, I talked to Melanie.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
yeah, Melanie.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Agree and all.
yeah, and I think what's her name from Ellis, but I can't think of it right now. But one of the things is that in those countries, obviously, one of the key things that they said is culture. Like it's different. Like that, they take damage prevention really serious.
Mhm.
And it's just kind of, especially in Australia, it's almost like the normal citizen kind of knows the basics.
Mhm.
And I think that goes back to where do we need to start,
Yeah.
especially in my area, which is education. And it has to start from little ones to kind of create that pattern and that behavior to kind of go, until I don't know, you get older and you have that, just because that's general, it has to come general knowledge at one point, just like the 911. But everybody
Yeah.
should kind of know, hey, what 811 is. I mean, it's, call before you dig. If you see those markings, that means that there are underground lines there. There's a gas line near you. But to this day, some people that I've encountered and some people I've talked to, they still don't know what the flags mean. And that's just something very silly, if you want to call it.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned Australia, and I've been fortunate to be down there a few times and talk at a few of the conferences, and I'll never forget and getting ready for speaking at their big national gas conference. And so I'm doing all this research, and this was a few years ago, so that research was harder back then than it is now. But trying to find a gas damage in Australia that led to people dying, to kind of disaster kinds of things, and it's like I couldn't really find any. I mean, they've had hits that have caused some damages, but somehow they've avoided. Now, granted, it's a lot fewer people, but it's still about the size of California, I think, population-wise, and of course, geographically
Massive,
huge.
yeah.
So, how have they dodged that bullet so effectively? To your point.
Yeah, and obviously we talk about a lot of this in the book, so
Yeah.
I would love for people
Don't spoil it yet.
to go deeper. But well, Scott's been telling all his good stories from the book already, so I would say the education. We have a whole chapter on just education and awareness.
Yeah, I see it here. Yep.
Yeah, and I don't want to steal your question from you, but you mentioned making this common knowledge from the earliest age. There's a danger there too, which is it becomes too commonplace. It's people know they've heard of 811, but it doesn't connect to their everyday.
Mhm.
So you do need to start with kids, and we recount tons of educational programs in the book. Obviously things like Digger Dog and like all the different mascots that are geared towards kids, and programs to the Boy Scouts and others that peer to peer at the youth age are demonstrating the importance of this. All these Digger Day type of activities where kids can come out and sit in an excavator, do the color markings. Those are all really important. When it gets to the older crowd, those things have to have already been there and been foundational, and you have to have the stakes there present, where someone might still know, okay, I know 811, I know call before you dig. I learned stop, drop, and roll as a kid. I've never been on fire. It can become something that's not important to your everyday life. And that's where we're trying to bring it all back to some kind of message. We use holding back disaster for that reason, to say, this is the thing that prevents your house from exploding or your neighborhood from being evacuated. It's a thing that actually keeps people alive. And it might not be you, it might be a contractor, but it might be your neighborhood. And it might be you get stuck in traffic for 2 hours because you can't reroute because somebody else did something. It's just important to make sure the stakes are also present in it. We use a couple examples from Australia, but also other places. Even the phrase we use, call before you dig, every dig, every time, they're all good. they're important, but they don't always communicate the stakes. One of the best examples was actually an overhead line campaign. Look up and live.
From Australia has that
Yeah.
over, yeah.
And
Not only
it's all
knowing
right
underground,
there.
but only also knowing overhead, yeah.
Yeah, it's all right there in the same slogan. Look up and live. You understand immediately you will die if you don't look up. Whereas, and this is not a knock on call before you dig, it doesn't communicate the stakes. It just tells you the instruction, call before you dig.
Yeah.
And so people who understand the instruction but don't understand the stakes might not call because they don't feel like it is relevant to them,
there's
or they don't
nothing
think
there in the
it's going to
message,
matter.
really. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can't put too many words in a short slogan that people will remember. Call before you dig, so you don't die. You know, that doesn't ring as well.
True.
But I would say that's something to think about as an industry. How can we make sure the stakes are present, people understand it, we're doing the right education and awareness? It's a lot packaged into one. That's why it's an evergreen challenge.
Yeah, there's no emotion tied to it like there is look up and live. There's clearly emotion tied to that phrase versus call before you dig. It is again an action, not an emotion.
Yeah,
that's interesting. I mean, it definitely is. It's hard, right? To, like you said, in such a short message to kind of create that awareness right away. Because when you say call it 1 before you dig, but it really doesn't translate into like, okay, if I don't do it, what's wrong? Like you said. Scott, I have a question for you. I know you have more than 40 years of experience in the industry. What has changed the most in damage prevention, and still what hasn't changed enough?
Well, kind of as I mentioned before, the biggest change was all of a sudden having 811 and click before you dig in Canada. Those really made the biggest difference. And then kind of the stuff we talked about, the technology has really changed, especially with the mapping and the software. And probably what still needs to change and hasn't changed enough is just a kind of that whole everybody's in it together kind of mentality. And on one hand, it's not fair to say because like everybody you work with at, Okie 811 or whatever, yeah, you're a team and your regular stakeholders are all working together, but we all know generally those people are not causing the problems, right? So how do we bring the people who are not part of the process into the process now? And I know you face that every day, right?
Yeah.
And I've always kind of argued that as an industry, we really spend a lot of time on training the boots on the ground. So they're the people who are going to be doing the digging. And that's crucial, very important, all that kind of stuff. But those people may not have that job very long. So fortunately for you, that makes it a never-ending process, right? Education, you'll always have a job, but it's flipping that script a little bit and getting the entire C-suite to actually care. And that training shouldn't have to come from you. It shouldn't have to come from the 811 centers.
It should come from
awesome that you do it, but it ought to be internal. And you ought to be just picking up the strays that aren't with those companies. And so sadly, that really hasn't changed much in the 40 years that I've been doing it. I mean, you can always find an isolated executive somewhere, but it just hasn't ever taken hold at the highest level to drive that message down to their own troops across the board. So
it has to come, the safety culture has to come from that job, from that person, right?
Right.
All that learning, all that, what the law is and all that stuff. I think it from my experience, right, in here a little over a year at Oak, is that I'm noticing is that there is the intention, but safety culture still seems like it's hard to kind of to promote still somehow. I sometimes I think it's because, and to me, this is just personal opinion. I think it's because we live in such a fast-paced world, and we don't have. I feels like there's no enough time to tell you how things are, really. You just go ahead and do it. I feel like that's how it is nowadays. You just go ahead and do it, do what you can. But I don't have time to tell you how really things can be if you don't follow this procedure, this protocol. And, I think obviously external factors, right? But there's not enough time, I guess, or people that don't want to take the time to, have these guys that are out there on 100 degrees outside and learn something that is going to keep them safe at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think it's just they don't
Yeah,
want to do that, I guess.
I agree, but it's like I'm sure all of us have seen a presentation by Cliff Meidel at some point over the years, right? So I'm pretty sure that there's almost nobody who's seen his presentation that goes out and digs without getting a locate. So we have the way and we have those messengers out there, but again, that message is still getting focused on the boots on the ground and maybe one more level up and not in the C-suite. And, I still believe it could be monetized. And if we as an industry can come up with a way to show that, the president of XYZ pipeline or telco, that this actually over the next 10 years is way less expensive. It's a much better investment to prevent the damage than it is to fix it. And also you save people's lives at the same time. I mean, that's there. Somehow finding a way to get that ball rolling with CEOs. It's not an easy task, but I think it's a vital one.
We'll see. There's still a lot of time, right?
Yeah.
A lot of time. Benjamin, now this question for you. From a policy and research perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges to creating more consistent damage prevention practices across the country?
Yeah, I think you could take this question so many different ways. I would start with, it is a challenge because there are so many different incentives. Every stakeholder has their own incentive. And because they're all working together, they don't necessarily align. And there's obviously ways to align them, and culture is one of those things. But we've talked about the excavator doesn't pay for the request, so it's free to them. That might mean they call in too much or use too many ticket requests, and that starts to have consequences downstream. But then the utility side, they aren't feeling like necessarily they want to give more than they're paying for to the excavator. They're not paying for anything. So why am I going to give you extra information? I'm going to give you what I'm legally required or have to do. And so like cracking that incentive issue is one reason you don't have more streamlined, efficient, safe practices. The kind of classic example I would give is enhanced positive response. If the excavator using the call center's platform can make their request and then have a way to check the status of their ticket and potentially get information like photos and notes and maps, it's still incumbent on the utility or the locator to put that stuff in the system so the excavator can see it. And again, if the incentives aren't there, why am I giving you more information than I have to as the locator, as the utility company? That's not all lined up. And so then you get to like public policy, legal changes. Well, if it's a legal requirement, now they have to. But then you start getting into, okay, if the law is going to change, we're going to have lobbyists from all different sides coming in to tell legislators, well, you should put this provision in. And the legislature may be a lot of things, but they're not experts on damage prevention. So they have to be told and then trust the people telling them what to do. And to cite another example, white lining. We all love white lining. It's the best way to tell someone what's happening on the site before you break ground. Well, there's physical white lining with spray paint, and there's virtual white lining. There's no spray paint in that one, or you can do it too, but then you'll get different incentives again, where maybe the locators don't want virtual white lining because it means the excavators aren't having to go to the site, but the locators are still having to go to the site. So then there's a lack of parity. They're not both required to go out to the site. Maybe it's 100 degrees, and the locator feels like, well, the excavator doesn't have to be out here. They called in a 1 mile ticket, all with electronic white lining, but I'm going to have to go walk the ground. They didn't even walk the ground and spray paint it themselves. You start to have cross incentives. And so how does the legislature sort that out? How do they say, well, we're going to pick a winner here. Everyone physically white lines. Okay, well, now you're penalizing the excavator who has to go out to the site when they could have done this virtually. Or you say you're going to do all virtual. Well, now the locator might feel shafted because they're going to have to go out and walk the line, but the excavator gets to sit in the AC. And so then the policy side gets, again, somebody has to iron out those incentives. And it's really difficult. Law doesn't change quickly. It doesn't change often. And when it does change, it's not always the right change. There's a lot of reasons for that, but it starts with incentive. I think culture is obviously pervasive in that too. Last quick answer I'll give is just data. It's just really hard to know what's happening. Anecdotes are very powerful, but they're one off. It happened here this time. It's never going to happen that way again.
Yeah.
And just out today, CGA puts out an economic study on the real cost of damages.
Oh, like a couple of billions of dollars. I saw that. Yeah,
a couple of billions, 83 billion is
Billions,
their estimate, which I think is a fantastic estimate. It goes perfectly with what we've said in the book. We cover damage numbers, costs, impact. All of that is perfectly aligned with what CGA put out today. But it's just so hard to get real numbers. And no knock at all to CGA, but with voluntary reporting, it's hard to know how many true damages are happening out there. You can't require that every single person report every single damage because you're going to have compliance issues. There's going to be lots of issues. So it's hard to know the actual official real life objective costs, damage numbers, and all these things. So from a research perspective, getting the best you can or estimating things, modeling is really important. And then sharing, collaboration. So I would love to see reports that include their methodology, that include footnotes. You don't always get that from every entity. Sometimes there's a top line summary finding, which is really helpful for getting the quick top line, but it's not helpful for reproducibility or for uncovering whether that's really the true cost, number, damage, mileage, whatever it is. So the more we can collaborate, be open-handed, and share things, even at a policy level or research level, not just the actual handoff between excavator, locator, call center, utility, but organization to organization, trade association to trade association. Sharing information helps us all. So
it's a huge challenge. And again, we can go back to what could work for one state. We need, like you said, we need the data to see if another state can apply it, right?
Yeah.
And
this is where you don't necessarily want a national dig law, or if you do, there needs to be really basic fundamentals that everyone has to require, and then allow the states to do different things where it does matter for them. And we give the example, it's just different in Alaska than it is in New Jersey. You need maybe more time to go out and do a remote locate than go across town in an urban environment. It looks different. Those places need different laws. But I love the example of how many days between notification and when you can start the job, because some laws say, the day of notification counts as a day. Some starts the next day. That, to me, could just be standardized. And I love the 5-finger example. The notification day, the safe digging day. There's 3 days in between. Like, everyone can do that. We could just have that be the rule nationally. It's not going to disrupt everything.
In your opinion, you think some of the basics should be all standardized?
Like standardized, yes. Whether that's a federal law, I'm not weighing in on. But standardized, the industry should say, look, we're going to, maybe this is CGA's role, but somebody should say, look, we're done with the different day counts. We're all just going to do the 5-finger thing. Notification day, whether it's 11:59 or 3 a.m. or 6 p.m., that's notification day. You can dig on this day. These are the days the locator gets to do their job. It's intuitive. Everyone can look at their own hand. There's no question about start day, notification day. That needs to be standardized, personally, my view. I'm not necessarily, again, saying PHMSA needs to step in or Congress, but every state could easily say, all right, what next time we open the dig law, we'll just make that modest change. Start to bring everyone in alignment. Because there are examples of contractors who work, or locators who work across state lines, who are right at an intersection of 2, 3, or 4 states. Their job gets more complicated when the state law varies, and they might, in good faith, think they're in a different state. They'd be thinking of the law from one state when they've just crossed the state line, and then they get a violation, but they were trying to do the right process. It can be confusing. Anytime there's confusion, there's opportunity for damage. So
risks. what do you guys think about new technology, better mapping, and you were saying data can play in reducing underground utility damages in the future? I've heard in previous interviews that, and this is just I want you guys' opinion, like fiber sensing underground that can
Yeah.
detect
Yeah.
damage and whatever's happening above. What do you guys think? Not only that, but other type of technology that can potentially help in reducing damages in the future.
Yeah, I mean, the technology is obviously going to be huge, and the example that you cited is amazing, right? That you can have a fiber there that senses damage, can sense construction activity.
Sound,
That's
whatever. Yeah,
crazy.
yeah.
Yeah, and marrying all this stuff then with all the latest AI is absolutely going to change the future, but you still have to have everybody communicating. Time and time again, you if there is a group of stakeholders, facility owners, and contractors, at least I've always kind of noticed in these microcosms where it's the same people. There's not a lot of turnover, for instance. They just don't have damages because they're all talking. And when they're all communicating, they don't have damages. But that's not, we can't replicate that everywhere, right? There are going to be personnel changes and all that. So somehow having technology help us fill that gap, it's coming and it's there. And then getting everybody to embrace new technology in our industry, well, in any industry, sometimes it's not always easy.
Yeah, I think I fortunately sit at an interesting place, the Alliance for Innovation and Infrastructure, where I get to hear about innovation that impacts our infrastructure.
Correct.
And I've heard from a lot of companies who think they have the solution that's going to solve damage prevention. And maybe they do. But then you have the problem where it has to be systemic. It has to literally cross the entire system. Everyone has to use it or do it or follow that procedure before it actually moves the needle. And if they all did it, if they all got systemic, we probably wouldn't have any damage. If you have 10 technology companies doing 10 different types of technology, apply this to this industry, you probably overnight see a huge difference. I really like the example you give. So distributed fiber optic sensing, for me, is the first time this industry has switched from being reactive to proactive. So it's reactive that somebody calls 811 and then we all react to that. The utility company, they double check the maps, they see if they have a conflict or if they can clear it. They notify the locators, they're going out to react to the incident. The distributed fiber optic sensing, which you're well familiar, Texas 811 is piloting through its
Yeah,
Guardian
yeah. I
program.
talked to Paul Dickinson.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm shocked to learn he's the one who's advocating this.
Yeah, he gave me a whole explanation about
Yeah.
fiber.
Yeah.
Really, really nice guy. Really interesting topic. Yeah,
It's a
I loved
great
it. Yeah.
it's a great application because now we can actually be proactive. And so it's not just reacting, in some sense, it's reacting to the fiber now notifying you and you're reacting to it. But picture the scenario where somebody goes out and they're doing excavation, they never called in a ticket. The fiber optic cable is hearing the disturbance, and Texas 811, for instance, gets the alert there is a ground disturbance happening near this public right of way. They check their system and immediately see there's no ticket anywhere in the vicinity, and they can send somebody out to stop the work. Of course, like I said, they're reacting to that, but the fiber is proactive. It's leaning forward. It's hearing what's happening out in the world. And that's the first time that we have the ability to even be proactive in this.
To be ahead of the curve slightly.
Yeah, you typically have to just wait till somebody notifies you, I'm gonna dig. And then, you follow the process and hope when they start to dig, it's all safe. This way, at least gives you that situational awareness, the real time. And maybe if there is a ticket there, okay, we say, okay, we know there's a ticket there. They follow the process. We can at least notify everyone, hey, digging has started at this site, so that you're that much closer. If an incident happens, they can turn off the gas line or they can do something in that much quicker real time. I think that's a revolutionary shift. And I think you're only going to see more of that as more technology comes online, more ability to communicate between things, and more interconnection between the call center and those technologies. So it all has to fold into itself. If the distributed fiber optic sensing wasn't interfacing with the call center, then somebody might be listening to it, but they have to tell somebody else.
Correct.
Having that kind of central nervous system, the call center, be in the know for all those things, I think is really important.
I think the challenge would be expanding right through the whole country, each
Mhm.
Yeah.
811 center. That would
Mhm.
probably,
Yeah.
cost, has to be cost efficiently and having everybody collaborating. That would be, like you said, Scott, everybody on the same page.
Mhm.
It's kind of like the biggest challenge, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say, we talk about the technology a lot, which is crucial, and that's a great example. But I think also I think you've probably talked about it maybe on a podcast before, but the program, the damage prevention professional certification program they're working on up in Alberta. Um, I personally think that has the biggest potential long term to impact damage prevention in the industry, because once we get everything standardized and people can get certified in all these different areas along the way, I really think that changes the game completely, and all for the good. Really without adding costs, just kind of formalizing it so people can get there and get trained and be certified, and companies know they're hiring somebody certified. I just think it's going to be a big game changer, not certainly overnight, but maybe even faster than having fiber over every single pipeline or cable.
I have two last questions for you guys before we finish. First, now a little back to the book, more details with the book. One of the most, I guess, interesting chapters. I know they're all interesting, but one of the ones that you guys really took time and did perhaps more research, but the ones that you guys really feel, I guess, more passionate about. Which one was it out of the 13 chapters that you guys have?
Mm-hmm. Well, I can go first. That one's easy for me. It would be the chapter 7. That's that damage prevention fever kind of thing. Is just because from my personal experience, I was never a locator. I wasn't out digging, doing all that kind of stuff. But being very involved in the CGA for a long time, and just everything in the industry, and seeing the passion that is out there is just amazing. And that's everything you see. I mean, everywhere you go, people come up with the most clever ways to promote damage prevention, to talk about education, and it's because they're passionate about the mission. And that was kind of like what I said in presentations in Australia when they asked what's the number one thing that makes damage prevention effective in the US, and it's passion. It's the people out there on a mission. You're making a difference.
What about for you, Scott? Benjamin, sorry.
Yeah, no, I agree with Scott that his essentially it's his chapter. It's a chapter about what
Chapter
Scott
7.
has been able to do over 40 years. My I think his favorite chapter that was also the most interesting to work on and research is chapter 13. If you can make it that far into the book, I think it's a chapter.
The human impact.
Yeah, it really tells the stakes. So we start the book again after the title, Holding Back Disaster. You see the stakes right there. The book intros with a disaster scenario so that the reader immediately sees what could happen. And then you go into explaining the industry, how it all works, what are the incentives, who are the stakeholders, what's the history. There's a lot in this book. If you can get through all that, we close it back out with the human impact. And so chapter 13 basically says, look, we've gotten this far. You've read all these things, all the history, all the lessons, all the case studies, all the quotes, but it kind of grounds you again in why does this matter? What is the impact? And we recount dozens of stories where some people died or a lot of people died.
Yeah.
Some, nobody was hurt. It was fine, but whole businesses went under. One example, people don't think that water is as big of an issue, but people die when water happens. People drown. There's electrocution risks, all these different things. It can also flood whole cities, reroute traffic. We basically tried to take every kind of incident and say, like, here's an example where that happened. A water incident, a fiber incident, and not just your typical like, oh, fiber line cut. I cut my neighbor's fiber line once. What was the stakes of that? He literally had to call AT&T, and it took a day off of his work. The stakes weren't that big. There's an example of somebody cutting a whole country's fiber line, or 911 being down for an entire region because a fiber line got cut. So seeing it's not just that, oh, you nicked a water line or a fiber line got cut. So what are those human impacts? How many people can be impacted? What are the costs? That chapter for me, it reads a lot quicker. I think you might find that some of the chapters get a little dense. That one you really flow through it because it's storytelling. It's seeing this happened to these people. I can relate to it, or I know somebody who that happened to. And if none of those are true, you don't know somebody who's happened it to, you can see this could happen to me, or I understand, especially when children are involved. A young child died in this incident. I never want that to happen, especially, I mean, I'm a father, I have 2 young kids. Those kind of stories are really jarring for me to read. And so we wanted to give that to the reader. Some things they would relate to at different ages. I'm just, all the stories are popping into my head.
I know. And I've got the chance to see some of, I mean, in our presentations, we try to give real life examples. And, you know, we have one about an explosion and a worker died and they didn't put a local request. We have one about hitting a fiber and then the whole airport in Dallas was shut down for almost a whole day. So it's out there. It happens. It happens every second. So, but when you hear the stories like you're saying that somebody actually, you know, passes away, that's when you really like, you know, it really grabs your attention.
Yeah.
And
well,
we don't see it that way sometimes.
And there's a lot of things we cover in that chapter too that people might not think about, like an incident where the initial contact happened years earlier. But if it wasn't reported and nobody ever fixed it, that tiny little, call it a near miss, but there was contact. It was not a huge damage at the time. 5 years later, now there's fatalities. And when you do the root cause investigation, you go back 5 years. That's the kind of thing that helps, I think, this industry see, and I think this goes back to culture too. Every dig, it's not just notifying 811, it's also following through all the way to report everything, feel like you're invested enough to make sure you tell the other stakeholders everything that happened on that site. If your mentality is, oh, we hit the pipeline, don't tell anyone, we didn't see any gas rupture, let's get in and out of this project, you might be responsible 3-5 years from now for a huge fatality. And that type of example is covered in that chapter too.
Now, last question. It's kind of similar, but I want you guys both give me an answer on this question. If readers take away just one message from holding back disaster, what do you hope it is? And I'll start with Scott. Yeah.
I would say, honestly, you know, one of the missions of the book is to draw in younger people into the industry. We need to build the industry. And so the takeaway is like, I can make a difference. I want to get into that industry because I've read all this. I understand it. It can save lives. And I can also see that I personally can go in and make a difference. And it's simple, but I think it's a crucial takeaway. And we just need more people seeing this as an industry and as a career opportunity.
Yeah, I think I'm going to resonate with what Scott said with my point. You don't have to go become an excavator or do locator training or work for a call center to work in this industry. I certainly don't. I would consider myself somewhat involved in damage prevention. It takes all kinds. There needs to be people who know how to write code and who do marketing and awareness and who do education and who do all types of things, research, public policy, advocacy. Every industry has all these different types of things. And just because this one involves moving dirt doesn't mean it doesn't take all those roles too. And so my takeaway is it is high tech, it is active, it is vibrant, it is diverse. People should know that you can be involved, to Scott's point. You can and should be involved, and you can actually save lives and make the whole world a lot safer and more efficient and more resilient. From wherever you are. And for a homeowner, that just might be calling 811 before you dig. But everyone is touching this industry in some way. And so, you know, I want people to know the stakes. I want people to know those things. But the takeaway, the walk away from this is you can be involved too. And you don't have to become a locator. You can be involved from where you are.
Well, guys, with that being said, thank you so much for this great episode. It's amazing. Really enjoyed the whole conversation. Scott Landis and Benjamin Dierker, authors of the new book, Holding Back Disaster, is out there, right? Now people can buy it in stores and online as well, correct?
Yep, it's out.
Well, awesome. Guys, I want to really congratulations for the book.
Thanks so much.
That'll be really great. And for those who want to get the book, it's out there and take a full read about it and learn, because it has a lot of great information. So I'm really excited to learn more about it as well. And again, I would love to connect with you guys soon. And for those out there, stay safe. Always dig smart, dig safe. And until next time.